In August 1943, in the Atlantic Ocean, during the Second World War, an American ship rescues 3 British soldiers who have been found adrift. During the rescue, the crew spots a German ship approaching and Bryce orders his team to hurry, as they need to get out of there as soon as possible. After gathering all the crew inside the ship, the captain and his co-pilot work together to turn the ship into a submarine, and they hide underwater while watching for approaching enemies. Meanwhile, a rumor is spreading on the ship about the 3 survivors who were rescued adrift. When they discovers that one of the Brits on the ship is a woman, the soldiers are thrilled with the news and feel honored to have a nurse on board. The woman and her companions were on board the Fort James, a ship that provided first aid to soldiers who had been wounded in battle. However, 2 nights ago, they were attacked and only the trio survived. His ship had at least 300 patients, but only one of them managed to survive the attack. At this point, the submarine's crew hears the enemy ship approaching and begins to suspect that the Germans have managed to detect its location. So the captain decides to turn off the engines to reduce the noise, and the submarine begins to sink to the depths of the ocean. According to Coors, the cold water is capable of deflecting sound waves, so the crew will be able to throw off the enemy army. Suddenly, a record starts playing and Odell rushes to turn it off, but it was too late, as the noise echoed, giving away the location of the soldiers. At that moment, the Germans send barrels full of explosives to destroy the submarine, and all the crew are hit by the impact of the explosions. As they try to hold on, the bombs throw the submarine from side to side. When the attack comes to an end, Bryce orders his team to make a damage report to assess whether any repairs need to be made before the ship's engines are started up again. At this point, Odell is questioned about the record player, and his team begins to suspect that it was Kingsley, one of the rescued survivors, who turned it on to reveal the location of the submarine. While going through the belongings of Schillings, the 3rd rescued survivor, one of the crew discovers that he is actually a downed German army airman, so the captain immediately starts looking for him. When he arrives at the infirmary, Bryce is ready to eliminate the German soldier, but in an attempt to save her patient, Claire takes the blame, saying that it was she who asked him to hide his true nationality. However, Bryce decides to ignore it, and, despite knowing that the man is a prisoner of war who, according to the Geneva Convention, deserves humane treatment, the captain decides to eliminate him. Furious, Bryce says that Claire should have told him the truth, because her secret almost cost the lives of every member of the crew. As punishment, the captain sentences the nurse to be confined to a room until the end of the mission and orders Odell to make sure she doesn't leave her quarters. The woman's aim in hiding Schilling's true identity was to save at least one of her patients, but she ended up failing in her mission. Just then, the record player turns on again and loud music suddenly starts playing, making Bryce realize that he may have made a mistake, because perhaps Schillings wasn't responsible for turning it on to reveal the location of the submarine. Now, the next mission is to find out who is sabotaging the crew, because the incident with the record player has made it clear that someone is trying to harm them. That night, while serving her sentence in confinement, Claire begins to hear a mysterious voice coming from under her bed. Frightened, she gets up to see who is there and is startled to see the scary foot. Desperate, the woman screams for help, and, immediately, Odell appears to rescue her. At this point, they discover that it was all just a bad prank by the other crew members, and Bryce reprimands his men for disrespecting the deceased. The captain then orders Stumbo and Hogue to dispose of the body, and the pair take the lifeless German to the upper deck so that they can throw him into the ocean when the ship rises back to the surface. However, in the middle of the night, Stumbo starts to hear some whispers and gets scared. As he approaches Schilling's body, he hears a loud sound and ends up falling back to the floor below. From that moment on, the crew member becomes convinced that there is a ghost inside that submarine and tries to convince his colleagues of this theory, but for obvious reasons nobody believes what he is saying. Convinced that their companion is delirious, the men try to calm him down while Coors and the captain prepare the boat to surface. Tired of being locked inside a cabin, Claire decides to ignore Brian's orders and walks freely down the corridor. Suddenly, she hears the sound of an object falling to the floor, and, as she bends down to pick it up, she discovers that she is in front of a book that belongs to Bryce. Immediately, the nurse returns the encyclopedia to the shelf where it was and comes across the captain's logbook. While reading the statements written in that notebook, Claire has the sensation of hearing a voice approaching and quickly looks behind her, but finds no one. Suddenly, the closet door opens and, as she tries to close it, the woman is surprised by a loud noise that leaves her paralyzed. But then she starts rummaging through the cupboard and has to disguise herself when she hears someone approaching. When he opens the cabin and sees Claire sitting in the captain's chair, Coors reprimands her and orders the nurse to return to her quarters. While investigating whether there are any enemy ships nearby to assess whether it is safe to surface, Bryce and his team end up crashing into the seabed. as the submarine's engines were damaged during the last attack and the vessel doesn't have enough strength to surface. At this point, Bryce decides to check on Claire and discovers that the woman has read the log of the real captain of the ship. When he realizes that she is suspicious of his intentions, Bryce decides to explain why he has taken command of the crew. The man says that he and his team were tasked with chasing down and eliminating a German ship and, at the first opportunity, they fired a torpedo to destroy the rear of the vessel. They then went to the surface to inspect the damage to the enemy ship, but all they found was debris floating in the water. During the inspection, Captain Winters decided to go down to tow an object that was floating in the water to include it in his collection. In his attempt to obtain another item for his collection, Winters fell, hit his head, and the crew of his ship were unable to rescue him. As Brian finishes telling this story, the lights go out and he notices the presence of Odell, who has gone there to report that the humidity has caused the power panel to drip, causing the submarine's electricity to be cut off. At the control panel, the team tries to hear any noise coming from outside and discovers that the Germans are using giant hooks to destroy the ship. During the attack, the submarine is seriously damaged and the ocean water begins to invade the compartments, forcing all the crew to leave the cockpit in a hurry. While Odell closes the hatch, Loomis orders his men to start the engines to get out of there, as the German soldiers now know their position. Luckily, all the submarine's crew manage to survive, but they soon realize that the vessel is losing oil at high speed. The damage responsible for causing this loss is somewhere between the pressurized hull and the outer hull. This means that every time the submarine surfaces or submerges, it will leave an oil slick that will serve as a trail for the Germans to find. The only way to solve this problem is from the outside, so Bryce orders his men to separate diving equipment to do the job. The next stage of the mission will be to find 3 volunteers to leave the submarine, being Odell and Stumbo, those drawn. In addition to him, Coors and Wallace also agreed to take part in the mission, and the quartet opened the hatch that led them out of the submarine. When they enter the ocean, the men are surprised by the presence of a flock of giant stingrays, but as soon as Odell turns on the flares, they move away. Quickly, the team swims to the underside of the hull and finds a large hole through which they can pass. At this point, the two pairs split up to investigate the pressurized hull and the outer hull to find out where the oil is leaking. During the mission, Coors tells Odell what really happened the night Captain Winters lost his life and says there's no way he could have hit his head before falling into the water. The crew member says that, after the German ship was destroyed, some of the castaways managed to survive and Bryce tried to rescue them, but Winters ordered a new attack. With the help of his artillery, the captain got rid of all the enemies who were defenseless in the water and, as a result, caused some members of his team to revolt. While telling this story, Odell sees Winters' ghost right in front of him and gets scared, dropping his hammer on Coors' head. At that moment, the entire crew hears the scream of their companion and the whole group goes into despair. Quickly, Stumbo and Wallace go to meet their friends to check what has happened and find Coors' body floating in the water. Frightened, they return inside the ship and Loomis asks where Coors is. Then everyone is shaken when they discover that their companion lost his life during the mission. Suddenly, the team hears some knocks and realizes that someone is trying to communicate in Morse code. But Loomis claims that these are just random noises caused by an object hitting the ship's hull. Terrified, Bryce begins to think of an effective strategy to take the submarine to an English port, but all the crew know that this will be an impossible mission, since both the periscopes and the sonar have been destroyed. So the crew won't be able to sail for 2 whole days without being discovered and, to make matters worse, Claire reveals that she believes the submarine is haunted. The truth is that all the crew members already suspected this theory, but none of them had the courage to say these words out loud, because they can't bear the thought of being trapped at the bottom of the sea along with a legion of ghosts. However, Bryce is not swayed by this absurd idea and orders his men to recharge their batteries so that they can maintain their course back to their base in Connecticut. After recalculating the route, Bryce gives the coordinates so that the pilot can adjust the navigation direction. However, when trying to take control of the rudder, Loomis realizes that the steering wheel is moving on its own and, even with 2 men teaming up to try to control it, the submarine is guided in a direction contrary to the captain's coordinates. Determined to repair the navigation route, the crew join forces to try to control the rudder, which ends up being destroyed. The unforeseen event is justified by the technician as a hydraulic failure, but the big problem is that the route has now been completely altered and there is no way of changing it. Soon, rumors of the mechanical failure spread throughout the vessel and the team members begin to believe that perhaps the submarine really is haunted. Of all the theories created, the most popular is that during the battle, instead of defeating the German ship, they sank it and are now in a kind of purgatory. While his colleagues speculate on an explanation for what is happening, Pappy appears and claims that all those unforeseen events were due to mechanical failures, not the fault of supernatural beings. When he discovers that the submarine's nitrogen levels are lower than expected, Chief and his team decide to investigate what's going on. However, a few minutes after they enter the room to analyze it, the lights go out and the trio are trapped inside. Meanwhile, Odell enlists Kingsley's help to plot a route to England to use as a plan B in case the ship is unable to reach the United States for some reason. On recalculating the route, Kingsley shows that the crew have ended up in the same place they were when the German ship sank, so Odell decides to show Loomis the map and asks what's going on. At this point, Loomis says that it's all just a coincidence, because it's completely impossible that some supernatural being could have purposely put the crew back on that course. Even though he denies the existence of ghosts, Loomis gets excited when he has to talk about it once again, and the discussion is interrupted by the arrival of the captain. As he can't get in touch with Chief and his team, Bryce sends Odell and Loomis to investigate what happened, and when they arrive at the maneuvering room, the pair realize that the place is looking like a sauna. After opening the hatch, the sailors enter to look for their companions, but all they find are parts of their bodies. After finding their colleagues eliminated and checking that the submarine's battery is still working, Odell and Claire leave the room, but end up losing Loomis, who is obsessed with his reflection in the mirror. After a few seconds of looking at himself, the man realizes that his reflex is not acting in sync with his movements and begins to think he is going mad. When he turns his back to the mirror to leave, Loomis feels he is being watched and looks back at his reflection, but this time he is faced with Winda's ghost and despairs. After coming across this evidence that supernatural beings really do exist, the man has no choice but to admit that the ship is haunted. His fear of ghosts is so great that he makes a rash decision, so he abandons the submarine and tries to swim to the surface without any protective equipment. However, in the middle of the journey, Loomis ends up being hit in the abdomen by one of the ship's external structures. In an attempt to find out what made his co-pilot act so rashly, Bryce starts going through Loomis' belongings and also comes across Winda's ghost. At that moment, he becomes certain that his former captain is back seeking revenge and begins to lose hope of getting off that ship alive with his crew. Worried about what fate has in store for them, Claire asks what really happened the night the captain lost his life, because she wants to understand why Winters is trying to haunt them. Terrified, Stumbo begins to wonder if Hoag's theory was right and comes to believe that all the crew members are no longer alive. Seeing that his colleagues are being eliminated in totally unexpected ways, Stumbo begins to think that there is no way out, so Claire strikes him. The nurse's aim is to show Stumbo that he is alive, so there is still hope. After getting away from the other members of the team, Claire and Odell talk about their suspicions that Winters didn't lose his life in an accident, as everyone believes. The couple's theory is that Coors, Loomis and Bryce created a mutiny to eliminate the captain, because each of them had a specific reason for wanting him eliminated. The truth was that Loomis was about to win a Medal of Honor, Bryce was ready to become a commander, and Coors had a daughter waiting for him in Boston. Each of these men had reason enough to want to live at all costs, and they got rid of their former captain because they believed that Winda's decisions would result in harm to the entire crew. In an attempt to reverse the situation, Odell asks for Wallace's help to regain control of the submarine, and the man says that the only way to do this is if they can get rid of the curse that has been placed on the vessel. Wallace's theory is that Winda's spirit is furious because the captain didn't have the chance to sink his ship. While Odell and Wallace go to ask the rest of the crew for help, Claire decides to start an investigation on her own and ends up in the captain's cabin. Again, she reads the logbook and this time finds information that wasn't there before, which Bryce had recently written down. After firing the torpedo at the German ship and hearing the impact followed by the ship's collapse, Winters and some of his men went out to confirm the sinking. When they reached the surface, they found countless bodies floating in the water and ended up eliminating the survivors. However, the truth is that the ship that was attacked was not a German ship, but the hospital ship where Claire and her team were on board. By analyzing the story in this new context, Odell comes to the conclusion that Captain Winters realized his mistake shortly after the attack and was trying to save the survivors of the shipwreck. However, in order not to have to deal with the consequences of their actions, Bryce and the others opposed the captain and decided to eliminate all the victims. Bryce was the member of the team who misidentified the ship, and, as he knew that his commander would not allow him to attack the survivors, the man decided to eliminate him. On reaching its final destination, where Fort James has been sunk, the submarine's engines are automatically switched off and the vessel also begins to sink. In an attempt to prevent the sinking, Odell and his team work together to bring the submarine back to the surface and succeed in their mission. However, while pulling a lever, Kingsley ended up being hit by a tool that flew towards him and lost his life due to a serious head injury. While checking the radar, Wallace realizes that there is a ship nearby, so Odell orders him to send out a radio signal to find out if that ship belongs to an enemy or an ally. At this point, Bryce appears and thanks Odell for his service, but says he's already feeling well enough to take over as commander again. The man then forbids Wallace to reveal his location, as he doesn't want to run the risk of having to surrender to the enemy army. However, realizing that Bryce is willing to sacrifice his entire crew to keep his name clean, Odell decides to challenge him and take the lead. The young man orders Wallace to contact the ship to ask for help, so Bryce strikes him and uses his gun to destroy all the radio sets. Realizing that the captain has gone mad for good, Claire decides to go out in a storm to try to get the other ship's attention, but Bryce goes after the nurse and threatens to pull the trigger if she doesn't obey his orders. Even though she knows that she could be eliminated at any moment, Claire tries to convince him that it is more honorable to assume that he has eliminated his commander than to cause the elimination of the entire crew just to hide his dark secret. When she sees the lantern in the captain's hands, the nurse has the idea of using that flash of light to attract the attention of the other ship, and Bryce decides to cooperate with her, as he has a guilty conscience for having been responsible for eliminating the entire crew of the Fort James. However, as he approaches to deliver the lantern, Bryce makes an unexpected decision and, after throwing the device into the ocean, he puts an end to his life. At this point, Odell grabs a gun and starts shooting into the sky to attract the attention of the ship's crew, and, at dawn, all the submarine's survivors are rescued. Luckily, that ship belongs to the American Navy, so Odell and his team didn't have to hand themselves over as prisoners to the enemy army. Relieved to have made it out of the ghost submarine alive, Odell and Claire watch the vessel sink. Now that his ship has sunk, Captain Winter's spirit can rest and the submarine will keep Fort James company at the bottom of the ocean. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.